The bullet missed Cassandra Monroe's head by inches, shattering the lantern behind her and plunging the Denver saloon into chaos. But she did not scream or duck like the other women. Instead, she picked up the nearest whiskey bottle and hurled it straight at the shooter's face with the precision of a practiced marksman. The year was 1878, and women like Cassandra were not supposed to exist in the Colorado Territory. They were not supposed to wear split riding skirts that scandalized the church ladies. They were not supposed to own property, or carry derringers in their boot holsters, or speak their minds in public forums about land rights and water access. Most importantly, they were not supposed to make hardened cowboys like Garrett Cole question every single belief they had built their lives upon. Garrett caught the would-be shooter by the collar before the man could recover from the whiskey bottle impact, dragging him toward the saloon doors with the kind of quiet efficiency that came from years of working cattle drives and handling disputes on the trail. He was 32 years old, 6 feet of lean muscle and sun-weathered determination, with dark hair that touched his collar and gray eyes that had seen too much death to tolerate senseless violence in a place where decent folks tried to drink in peace. "Get out and stay out," Garrett said, his voice low and steady as he shoved the drunk through the swinging doors. "Next time you draw on a woman, you'll be dealing with the law." When he turned back, those gray eyes met the most startling pair of green ones he had ever encountered. Cassandra Monroe stood in the wreckage of broken glass and spilled liquor, her auburn hair coming loose from its pins, her chest rising and falling with the aftermath of adrenaline. She was 24 years old and absolutely furious. "I did not need your help," she said, brushing splinters from her dark blue jacket. "I had the situation handled." Garrett felt his jaw tighten. He had just potentially saved her life, and she was angry about it. "Yes, ma'am, I could see that. Very handled. That is why there is a bullet hole in the wall about 3 inches from where your head was. And that is why I threw the bottle. I was about to follow up with this." She lifted her skirt just enough to reveal the small pistol tucked into her boot. Several of the saloon's patrons gasped. Garrett found himself caught between irritation and reluctant admiration. "You always go around armed to saloons?" he asked, crossing his arms over his chest. "I go around armed everywhere," Cassandra replied, smoothing her skirts back down. "This territory is not exactly safe for women who travel alone." "Then maybe you should not travel alone." The words came out before Garrett could stop them, and he immediately regretted the patronizing tone. Cassandra's eyes flashed with something dangerous, and she stepped closer to him, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of lavender mixed with gunpowder. "Maybe," she said, her voice dropping to a tone that was somehow both silky and sharp, "you should mind your own business, cowboy. I have been traveling alone for 3 years now, and I am still breathing, which is more than I can say for the last 2 men who tried to tell me what I should and should not do." She swept past him, leaving Garrett standing there with a strange feeling in his chest that he could not quite name. It was not until she had disappeared through the doors that the bartender, old Pete, chuckled from behind the counter. "That there is Cassandra Monroe," Pete said, already sweeping up the broken glass. "Owns the old Hendricks Ranch about 15 miles north of town. Bought it outright 2 years ago after her husband died. Runs the whole operation herself with just a couple of hired hands. She comes into town once a month for supplies and does not take kindly to men who think she needs protecting." Garrett absorbed this information slowly. A woman running a ranch alone was unusual but not unheard of. Widows inherited property all the time. But a woman who had been managing it successfully for 2 years, who carried herself with that kind of confidence and fire, who could throw a whiskey bottle with deadly accuracy. That was something else entirely. Her husband, Garrett found himself asking, how did he die? Pete's expression sobered. Trampled by a spooked horse about 3 years back. They had only been married 6 months. She was just 21 when it happened. Most folks expected her to sell the ranch and move back east where she came from, but she dug in her heels and proved everyone wrong. She has increased her herd by 40% and improved the water irrigation system. She even hired on a couple of men who could not find work elsewhere because they had served time, gave them a second chance when no one else would. Garrett felt something shift in his understanding. He had built his life on certain principles, rules that had seemed unshakable. Men protected women because women needed protecting. Men made the decisions about land and livestock because men knew best. Men took charge in dangerous situations because that was the natural order of things. Cassandra Monroe had just challenged every single one of those assumptions, and she had done it in the space of about 3 minutes. He told himself to forget about her. He had his own ranch to worry about, his own cattle to tend. The Cole property bordered the old Hendricks place, but in 2 years, he had never actually met the owner. He kept to himself, worked his land with the help of his 2 younger brothers and a handful of seasonal workers, and avoided town drama as much as possible. Getting involved with a woman like Cassandra Monroe was asking for trouble. But 3 days later, trouble found him anyway. Garrett was riding the northern fence line, checking for breaks after the last storm, when he spotted smoke rising from the direction of the Hendricks ranch. Not the dark, angry smoke of a structure fire, but the gray-white plumes of a controlled burn that had maybe gotten slightly out of control. He urged his horse into a gallop, telling himself that he was just being a good neighbor, that anyone would do the same. When he crested the ridge overlooking the Monroe property, he saw Cassandra and 2 men fighting to contain a grass fire that was creeping dangerously close to the barn. They had clearly been burning off an old field, but the wind had shifted, and now they were in danger of losing buildings. Garrett did not hesitate. He rode straight down the slope, already pulling his coat off to use as a fire beater. "Get buckets from the well," he shouted as he reached them. "Soak the barn walls," Cassandra whirled around, surprise flashing across her soot-streaked face. For a moment he thought she might tell him to leave, but then she nodded sharply. "Ben, do what he says. Marcus, help me with this section." For the next hour they worked in synchronized chaos. Garrett beat at flames until his arms ached and his lungs burned from the smoke. Cassandra worked beside him, never flagging, never complaining, her face set with fierce determination. Her 2 hired hands hauled water and dug fire breaks with the same desperate energy. Finally, the last of the flames died down to smoking char. They had saved the barn, saved the house, saved everything that mattered. Garrett stood bent over, hands on his knees, coughing and trying to catch his breath. When he straightened, Cassandra was standing a few feet away, looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Thank you," she said quietly. "We would have lost the barn without your help." Garrett wiped soot from his face with his ruined shirt sleeve. "You are welcome. Looks like your controlled burn got away from you." "The wind changed," she said, a defensive note creeping into her voice. "We checked the conditions this morning and everything was favorable. We cannot control the weather." "No," Garrett agreed, "but you can check wind patterns every 15 minutes when you are burning near structures, and you can cut wider fire breaks before you start." He saw her shoulders stiffen, saw her jaw set in that stubborn line he was already starting to recognize. "I appreciate your help, Mr. Cole, but I did not ask for a lecture on ranch management. How did you know my name? Everyone knows the Cole brothers. You own half the rangeland in this valley." She crossed her arms, suddenly looking exhausted and young and vulnerable in a way that made Garrett's chest tighten. "Look, I am grateful you helped us, truly. But if you rode over here expecting me to admit that I do not know what I am doing, you are going to be disappointed. That is not why I came." Garrett surprised himself with the honesty in his voice. "I came because I saw smoke on a neighbor's property and I was concerned, that is all." Something in her expression softened slightly. "Then I apologize for assuming otherwise. It is just that most men who offer me help do so because they think I am incapable, not because they are being neighborly." "I do not think you are incapable," Garrett said, and meant it. "I think you are stubborn, probably reckless and definitely too proud for your own good. But incapable? No, ma'am, you would not have survived this long if you were incapable. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, barely visible beneath the soot and exhaustion. Was that a compliment hidden in all those insults? Maybe. Then I suppose I should accept it graciously and offer you some coffee and a wash basin. You look like you just climbed out of a coal mine. The inside of Cassandra's house surprised him. Garrett had expected rough bachelor quarters, the kind of sparse functionality that most single ranchers settled for. Instead, he found a home. Books lined shelves in the parlor. Curtains framed the windows. The kitchen smelled like bread and herbs. There were small touches everywhere that spoke of care and intention. A vase of wildflowers on the table, embroidered pillows on the sofa, photographs in careful frames. "This is not what I expected," he said without thinking. Cassandra, who was pumping water into a basin for him, glanced over her shoulder. "What did you expect? A cave with a bedroll and some jerky?" "Something like that." She laughed, and the sound transformed her face. "Just because I can brand a steer and break a horse does not mean I have given up on comfort or beauty. My mother always said a home should feed the soul as much as the body. I try to honor that." Garrett washed his face and hands in the basin she provided, scrubbing away the worst of the soot. When he looked up, she was setting out cups and a pot of coffee that smelled like heaven. Her hired hands, Ben and Marcus, had come in as well, both men looking as tired and dirty as Garrett felt. "Sit," Cassandra commanded, and there was enough steel in her voice that all three men obeyed without question. She poured coffee, then disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a plate of sandwiches. "You all worked through lunch. Eat." Ben, a grizzled man in his 50s with weathered skin and kind eyes, took a sandwich with a grateful nod. Marcus, younger and leaner with a scar across his jaw, ate like he was starving. Garrett found himself watching the dynamic between the three of them, the easy familiarity that spoke of mutual respect. "Ben used to work for the railroad," Cassandra said, noticing his attention. "But he got injured on the job and they let him go with nothing but a handshake. Marcus made some mistakes when he was younger, served his time, but no one would hire him when he got out. I do not care about their pasts. I care that they show up every day and work hard, and they have never given me reason to regret hiring them." "She gave us a chance when no one else would," Ben said quietly. "We would ride through fire for Miss Monroe, nearly did today." "And I am grateful," Cassandra said, her voice softening. "But I also nearly got you all killed with that burn. Garrett is right, I should have been more careful." The admission clearly cost her something, and Garrett felt an unexpected surge of respect. Admitting mistakes was hard for anyone, but for a woman in her position, trying to prove herself capable in a world that constantly told her she was not, it must be nearly impossible. "Live and learn," Marcus said with a shrug. "No one died, nothing burned that mattered. We will know better next time." After the men finished their coffee and headed back out to check the damage, Cassandra walked Garrett to the door. The afternoon sun was slanting through the windows, turning her auburn hair to copper and gold. She had washed her face, and he could see a small cut on her cheekbone that she must have gotten during the firefighting. "You should put something on that," he said, gesturing to the cut. Her hand flew to her face, touching the wound gingerly. "It is nothing. It could get infected." "Are you always this bossy? Are you always this stubborn?" They stared at each other for a moment, and then both started laughing at the same time. The tension that had been crackling between them dissolved into something warmer, something that felt almost like friendship. "Thank you," Cassandra said again, more seriously this time. "Really, you did not have to help, and I know I was not exactly gracious about it at first." "You are welcome," Garrett replied. "And for what it is worth, I am sorry about the lecture. My brothers tell me I have a problem with trying to fix everything." "Do you have a problem with it?" He considered this honestly. "Probably. I have been making decisions and taking care of things since I was 17 years old. My parents died of cholera, and suddenly I was responsible for keeping the ranch going and raising my two younger brothers. I guess I got used to being in charge." Cassandra's expression softened with understanding. I lost my parents young too, not as young as you, but I was 19 when the fever took them both within a week of each other. That is when I met Daniel, my husband. He was working on my father's estate, helping to settle affairs. We married 6 months later, and I thought I had found safety again, found someone to lean on. Then he died, and I realized that the only person I could truly rely on was myself. That must have been terrifying. It was liberating. She met his eyes, her gaze clear and direct. Do not misunderstand. I loved Daniel and I mourned him, but I had spent my whole life having decisions made for me. My father decided where I lived, what I learned, who I could associate with. Then Daniel took over that role, even though he was kinder about it. When he died, I was lost for a while. But then I realized I could make my own choices. I could decide what kind of life I wanted to live, and once I realized that, I could never go back. Garrett understood then, with perfect clarity, why this woman unsettled him so much. She represented everything he had been taught was wrong. Women stepping outside their proper roles, challenging male authority, making their own way in the world. But she also represented something he had never dared to examine too closely, the possibility that the rules he lived by were not universal truths but simply comfortable lies. I should go, he said, though he found himself reluctant to leave. My brothers will be wondering where I disappeared to. Of course, Cassandra walked him out to where his horse was tied. Garrett, that is your name, right? Garrett Cole? Yes. If you ever want to come by for coffee and conversation without any fires or emergencies, you would be welcome. It gets lonely out here sometimes, and I do not have many neighbors who treat me like an equal instead of either a charity case or a scandal. He looked at her standing there in the late afternoon light, strong and proud and offering something that felt like the beginning of friendship, maybe more. Every practical instinct told him to refuse politely and keep his distance. Cassandra Monroe was complicated, challenging, the kind of woman who would never be content to simply accept his decisions and follow his lead. I would like that, he heard himself say. The smile she gave him was worth every bit of risk. Over the following weeks, Garrett found excuses to ride over to the Monroe ranch with increasing frequency. He told himself he was just checking on his neighbor, making sure she had not gotten herself into any more dangerous situations. But the truth was harder to ignore. He enjoyed her company. He enjoyed the way she challenged his assumptions, the way she made him think about things from angles he had never considered. They would sit on her porch in the evenings, drinking coffee and talking about everything from water rights to philosophy. Cassandra had been educated back east at a women's seminary, and her mind was sharp and curious. She read voraciously, everything from agricultural journals to poetry, and she was not afraid to disagree with him when their opinions clashed. You cannot seriously believe that women should not have the vote, she said one evening, setting her cup down with enough force to make it rattle. We pay taxes, we own property, we are affected by laws just as much as men are. On what possible grounds should we be excluded from the political process? Garrett shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I never really thought about it much. It is just the way things are. That is not an argument, that is an excuse. Her green eyes flashed with passion. Slavery was the way things were, child labor was the way things were. Just because something is traditional does not make it right. I suppose not. He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling off balance. But do not most women want to focus on their homes and families rather than politics? Do most women want that, or is that what they have been told they should want? Cassandra leaned forward. I have met plenty of women who are perfectly happy with traditional roles, and that is wonderful for them. But I have also met women who are brilliant, capable, interested in the wider world, and frustrated beyond measure that they are confined to parlors and kitchens. Why should one group get to choose while the other is forced into a mold? You make a fair point. I know I do. She sat back, a small smile playing at her lips. You do not have to agree with me right away, you know. I am not trying to convert you in one evening. I just want you to think about it. You want me to question everything I have ever believed. Is that so terrible? Garrett looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something shift in his chest. No, he said slowly, it is not terrible at all, it is just unsettling. Good things often are. His brothers noticed the change in him, of course. Logan, who was 28 and had a talent for reading people, cornered him in the barn one morning with a knowing smirk. You are seeing that Monroe woman, are you not? Garrett focused on the saddle he was cleaning. I visit a neighbor occasionally, that is all. That is all, Logan repeated, clearly amused. That is why you have been riding over there 3 or 4 times a week. That is why you come back looking all thoughtful and distracted. That is why you have started questioning how we run things around here. What is wrong with questioning how we run things? Nothing, it is just not like you. Logan leaned against the stall door. Look, I am not judging. Miss Monroe seems like an impressive woman from what I have heard. But be careful, Garrett. You are used to being in charge, used to women who defer to your judgment. From what I understand, Cassandra Monroe does not defer to anyone. Maybe that is what I like about her. The words hung in the air between them. Logan's eyebrows rose, but he had the grace not to push further. Just do not lose yourself trying to figure her out, and do not try to change her either. Women can always tell when you are trying to change them, and they never forgive it. It was good advice, though Garrett suspected Logan had learned it the hard way. His brother had a string of failed courtships behind him, each one ending because Logan could not quite commit to anything long-term. Their youngest brother, Jesse, who was 25 and still saw the world in simple terms of right and wrong, was less subtle about his opinions. At dinner that night, he brought up the Monroe Ranch with all the tact of a charging bull. I heard in town that Miss Monroe has been teaching her hired hands to read and write in the evenings, Jesse said, loading his plate with potatoes. That seems odd, does it not? Paying them to work, then spending her own time educating them? Why is that odd? Garrett asked, keeping his voice neutral. Well, what is the point? They are ranch hands. They do not need book learning to mend fences or herd cattle. They are human beings, Garrett said, surprising himself with the heat in his voice. They might want to better themselves, to have opportunities beyond manual labor. What is wrong with helping them do that? Jesse blinked. Nothing, I suppose. I just never thought about it. Maybe you should think about it. Logan caught Garrett's eye across the table and mouthed, see. But Garrett did not care if his brothers thought he was changing. He was changing, he could feel it happening, and the strange thing was that it did not frighten him the way he thought it would. Cassandra was showing him a different way of seeing the world, and instead of threatening his sense of self, it was expanding it. The real test came a month into their friendship, when Cassandra showed up at the Cole Ranch unannounced one morning, riding hard and looking furious. Garrett was working with a green horse in the corral when he heard the thunder of hooves. He turned to see Cassandra rein in her mare with expert precision, dismounting before the animal had fully stopped. I need your help, she said without preamble. The bank in town is refusing to extend my credit for the winter feed I need. They are claiming my ranch is too risky an investment. Why is it suddenly risky? You said your operation has been profitable. It has been. But apparently, the new bank manager does not believe a woman can sustain success long-term. He suggested I should consider selling to a more capable owner. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. I need someone to co-sign the loan, someone with an established reputation. I would not ask if I had any other choice, but my cattle will starve without supplemental feed this winter, and I have too much invested to lose it all now. Garrett could see what the request cost her. Cassandra prided herself on her independence, on not needing anyone's help. Coming to him like this must have felt like admitting defeat. Of course I will co-sign, he said immediately. We can ride into town this afternoon. Relief flooded her face, followed quickly by something more complicated. You do not want to think about it. Check my books, verify that I am a sound investment. Do you need to verify that? No, I know my ranch is sound. Then I trust your judgment. She stared at him for a long moment. Why, you barely know me. For all you know, I could default on the loan and leave you responsible for the debt. Garrett stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her green eyes. You could, but you will not. You are too proud to fail, too determined to prove everyone wrong. That loan will be paid back in full, probably early. You sound very certain. I am certain. He held her gaze. I believe in you, Cassandra. Even when you do not ask me to, even when it makes my life more complicated, I believe in you. Something shifted between them in that moment, some invisible barrier crumbling. Cassandra's eyes shone with emotion she was clearly fighting to control. No one has ever said that to me before, not my father, not my husband, no one. Then they were fools. She closed the distance between them in 3 quick steps and hugged him, fierce and brief and unexpected. Garrett's arms came up automatically to return the embrace, and he caught the scent of her hair, felt the solid reality of her against him. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed. I am sorry. That was inappropriate. Do not apologize. His voice came out rougher than he intended. I am not complaining. They rode to town together that afternoon, and Garrett co-signed the loan despite the bank manager's obvious disapproval. The man made several pointed comments about the risks of entangling one's finances with unstable ventures, all while looking at Cassandra like she was a particularly troublesome child. Miss Monroe's ranch has shown consistent profit for 2 years, Garrett said coldly. Her herd has grown, her land is well maintained, and her reputation for fair dealing is excellent. If you are concerned about risk, perhaps you should examine why you are willing to lend to men with far worse track records simply because they wear pants. The bank manager's face turned an interesting shade of purple, but he processed the loan. Outside, Cassandra practically glowed with satisfaction. That was magnificent. Did you see his face when you pointed out his hypocrisy? I have a feeling I am going to pay for that the next time I need a loan. Then I will co-sign for you, she grinned at him. We will be financially entangled. How scandalous. Cassandra Monroe, are you flirting with me? What if I am? The question hung between them, charged with possibility. Garrett realized that they had stopped walking and were standing in the middle of the street, staring at each other like the rest of the world had ceased to exist. Then I would say it is about time, he replied, and was rewarded with a smile that made his heart stutter. They began courting after that, though their courtship looked nothing like the traditional model. Cassandra refused to sit demurely in parlors while Garrett made polite conversation. Instead, they rode together across the rangeland, checking fences and herding cattle. They worked side by side, branding and rounding up strays. She taught him about the irrigation improvements she had made, and he shared his knowledge of breeding stock. His brothers watched this unorthodox relationship with a mixture of amusement and concern. Logan seemed genuinely happy for him, but Jessie remained skeptical. She is not going to change, Jessie warned one evening after Cassandra had left. If you marry her, you will have a wife who works like a ranch hand and speaks her mind like a man. Is that really what you want? Garrett thought about the question seriously. 6 months ago, he would have said no without hesitation. He had always assumed he would marry a sweet, biddable woman who would keep his house and raise his children while he made all the important decisions. Someone who would make his life easier, not more complicated. But Cassandra had shown him that ease was not the same as fulfillment. She challenged him, yes, but she also inspired him. She made him think deeper, feel more intensely, see possibilities he had never considered. Being with her was like riding a half-wild horse, thrilling and unpredictable and requiring all his skill and attention. But the alternative, a safe and boring ride on a tame mare, suddenly held no appeal at all. That is exactly what I want, he told Jessie. I want her exactly as she is. Proposing to Cassandra was its own kind of challenge. Garrett knew better than to assume she would accept simply because he asked. He also knew better than to try any kind of traditional romantic gesture. Cassandra would see through manipulative sentiment in an instant. So he waited until they were sitting on her porch one evening in early autumn, watching the sun set over the mountains. They had spent the day moving cattle to the lower pastures, and both were pleasantly tired. Cassandra had her boots off, her feet tucked up under her on the chair, and her hair was coming loose from its braid. "I want to marry you," Garrett said without fanfare. Cassandra turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "That is quite possibly the least romantic proposal in history." "Do you want romance? I can get down on one knee, compose poetry, bring you flowers. God, no, please do not do any of that." She smiled slightly. "But you could explain why you want to marry me. That would be nice." Garrett set his coffee cup down and shifted in his chair to face her fully. "I want to marry you because you are the bravest person I have ever met, because you challenge me to be better than I am. Because when I am with you, I feel more alive, more present, more myself than I ever have before. I want to marry you because I love you, Cassandra, and because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Her eyes had gone bright with tears, but she blinked them back stubbornly. "Those are good reasons. Are they good enough? Almost." She drew a shaky breath. "But I need you to understand what you would be getting into. I will not give up my ranch or fold it into yours. I will not stop working or defer to your judgment simply because we are married. I will not become some docile rancher's wife who stays home and tends the garden while you make all the decisions. If we do this, we do it as partners, as equals. Can you accept that?" This was the moment of truth, Garrett realized. He could say yes and mean it, or he could say yes and secretly hope she would soften her stance once they were married. The second option would be a betrayal of everything they had built together, and it would ultimately destroy them both. "I can accept that," he said, meeting her eyes. "More than accept it, I want it. You are right about partnership, about equality. I have spent the last few months watching you run your ranch, and you are brilliant at it. Why would I want you to give that up? Why would anyone want less of who you are instead of more? You say that now. I will say it every day for the rest of our lives if that is what it takes for you to believe me." He reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I am not asking you to change, Cassandra. I am asking you to let me stand beside you while you keep being exactly who you are. I am asking you to challenge me, frustrate me, inspire me, and love me, in that order." She laughed, a sound that was half sob. "You drive me crazy, you know that. You and your steady gray eyes and your unshakable calm and your complete certainty that I can do anything I set my mind to. It is infuriating. Is that a yes?" "That is a yes, you impossible man. Yes, I will marry you." Garrett pulled her out of her chair and into his lap, kissing her with all the pent-up passion and tenderness he had been holding back for months. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his hair, and for several minutes neither of them could spare breath for words. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cassandra rested her forehead against his. "We are going to scandalize the entire territory, you know that, right? A working wife, a husband who supports her independence. People are going to talk. Let them talk. Your brothers might disown you. Logan will come around. Jesse might take longer, but he will get there eventually. The church ladies will clutch their pearls and faint. I never liked those church ladies anyway." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "You are really ready for this? For all the judgment and gossip and disapproval? I am ready for you," Garrett said simply. "Everything else is just noise." They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at Cassandra's ranch, with Logan and Jesse standing as witnesses along with Ben and Marcus. The circuit preacher who performed the ceremony raised his eyebrows at some of Cassandra's requested changes to the traditional vows. She refused to promise to obey, and insisted on language about partnership rather than submission. But he married them anyway. The reception was simple but joyful. Cassandra wore a cream-colored dress with split skirts that scandalized no one because everyone who attended already knew what they were getting into. Garrett wore his best suit and could not stop smiling. They danced under the stars while Logan played fiddle, And for one perfect evening, nothing else mattered except the two of them and the life they were beginning to build. The reality of married life set in quickly, and it was more complicated than either of them had anticipated. Not because they did not love each other. That part was easy, natural, as inevitable as breathing. But because merging two independent lives, two separate ranches, and two strong wills was an ongoing process of negotiation and compromise. They decided to keep both properties operating independently, at least for the first year. Garrett would continue to run the Cole ranch with his brothers, and Cassandra would manage her own place. They would split their time between the two houses, which meant a lot of riding back and forth and careful coordination of schedules. "This is ridiculous," Jesse complained after the first month. "You are married. You should be living together full-time, and she should be here helping manage our ranch." "Why should she be here helping us instead of me being there helping her?" Garrett asked mildly. He was cleaning tack in the barn, working through a pile of bridles that needed repair. "Because this is the larger operation, because we are your family, because," Jesse stopped, clearly struggling to articulate something. "Because that is how it is supposed to work, according to whom, according to everyone, according to tradition." Garrett set down the bridle he was working on and looked at his youngest brother. Jesse was a good man, hardworking and honest, but he saw the world in black and white terms that allowed for no gray areas. It was time for a difficult conversation. "Jesse, I love you and I am grateful for everything you do here. But Cassandra is my wife, my partner, and I am not going to ask her to give up everything she has built just to conform to other people's expectations. If that is hard for you to accept, I understand, but it is not going to change." Jesse's jaw tightened. "You have changed. Ever since you met her, you have been different. You question everything now. You do not make decisions the way you used to. You are right. I have changed." Garrett stood, facing his brother directly. "I used to think I had everything figured out. I thought the way I saw the world was the only right way, and anyone who disagreed with me was wrong. Cassandra taught me that I was being narrow-minded and arrogant. She taught me to listen, to consider other perspectives, to question my assumptions. And yes, that has changed how I make decisions. I think it has made me a better man and a better leader. Or it has made you weak." The words stung, but Garrett kept his voice level. "Do you really believe that? Do you think respecting your wife makes a man weak? Do you think considering other viewpoints makes a man weak? Because if that is what you believe, then we have very different ideas about strength." Jesse looked away, clearly uncomfortable. "I just do not want to see you lose yourself trying to make her happy." "I am not losing myself. I am finding parts of myself I never knew existed." Garrett put a hand on his brother's shoulder. "Give Cassandra a chance. Get to know her, you might be surprised." It took time, but Jesse did eventually come around. The turning point came about 3 months into the marriage when a bad storm hit and caused significant damage to both ranches. Cassandra rode over to the Cole place to check if they needed help, and Jesse saw firsthand how capable she was. She worked alongside them for 12 hours straight, repairing fences and rounding up scattered cattle. She never complained, never asked for special treatment, never acted like the work was beneath her. By the end of the day, when they all collapsed in the kitchen covered in mud and exhausted, Jesse looked at her with something like respect. "You can really work," he said, and though it was not the most eloquent compliment, it was genuine. Cassandra grinned at him, her face streaked with dirt. "I have been telling you all that for months. I am glad you finally believe me." After that, Jesse stopped questioning Garrett's choices. He might not fully understand the relationship, but he accepted it, and that was enough. The first winter of their marriage was harsh. Blizzards swept down from the mountains, burying the rangeland under feet of snow. Both ranches lost cattle to the cold, and there were days when Garrett could not make it to Cassandra's place because the roads were impassable. Those separations were harder than he expected. He would lie in his childhood bed, staring at the ceiling and worrying about whether she had enough firewood, whether Ben and Marcus were able to keep the animals fed, whether she was safe and warm. When the weather finally broke enough for him to ride over, he would find her managing perfectly well, but she would light up when she saw him, and he knew she had missed him just as much. "We need to make a decision," Cassandra said one evening in February. They were at her house, sitting close to the fire with blankets wrapped around them. Outside, another storm was howling against the walls. "This situation is not sustainable. We are spreading ourselves too thin trying to maintain two complete operations." Garrett had been thinking the same thing. "What do you suggest?" "I think we should combine the ranches. Not merge them. Both properties keep their own identities. But we coordinate our efforts, share resources, work together as one larger operation. Your brothers could help manage my place when I am needed at yours, and Ben and Marcus could help at the Cole Ranch when you are short-handed." "That makes sense practically, but there is a problem." Garrett took her hand. "If we do that, people are going to see it as me taking over your ranch. They are going to assume I am the one in charge of the combined operation. Then we make it very clear that we are equal partners. We make decisions together. We both sign contracts and agreements. We both deal with buyers and suppliers." She squeezed his hand. "I trust you, Garrett. I know you will not try to push me aside or diminish my role, but I need everyone else to know it too. We can do that. We can make sure everyone understands this is a true partnership." They announced their decision at a meeting in town, inviting the other ranchers and key business owners. Garrett insisted that Cassandra stand beside him at the front of the room, and when he spoke, he used words like "we" and "our," and made it absolutely clear that he and his wife were equal partners in the newly combined ranch. There was some grumbling, some skeptical looks, but no one challenged them directly. And when the first spring cattle drive came around and Cassandra proved herself every bit as capable as any of the men, the grumbling died down. Actions spoke louder than words, and Cassandra's actions made it impossible to deny her competence. That spring was a revelation. Working together full-time, living in the same house every night, they fell into a rhythm that felt almost magical. Garrett had never experienced a partnership like this, where both people contributed equally, where decisions were made together, where no one had to carry the full weight of responsibility alone. "I never understood how lonely I was before," he admitted one night as they lay in bed together. The windows were open, letting in the cool spring air and the sound of crickets. "Even with my brothers, even with hired hands around all the time, I felt like I was alone with all the big decisions. Now I have you." Cassandra turned to face him, her hand coming up to trace the line of his jaw. "I felt the same way. I was so determined to prove I could do it all myself that I never let myself admit how much I wanted someone to share it with, not someone to take over for me, but someone to stand beside me. That is all I want to do, stand beside you, for the rest of my life." She kissed him, slow and sweet. "You are doing a very good job of it." By their first anniversary, the combined ranch was thriving beyond anyone's expectations. They had expanded the herd, improved both properties' infrastructure, and built a reputation for fair dealing and high-quality cattle. More importantly, they had proved that a marriage of equals could work, could even excel, in a world that insisted such things were impossible. Other women started coming to Cassandra for advice. Some were widows trying to manage inherited properties. Others were wives frustrated with husbands who refused to see them as capable partners. Cassandra never turned anyone away. She would sit with them on her porch, share her experiences, and encourage them to stand up for themselves. "You are becoming a revolutionary," Garrett teased one evening after a particularly long conversation with a young widow who was fighting her late husband's family for control of their ranch. "I am just helping women understand their own strength," Cassandra replied. "Someone should have done that for me years ago. Maybe I would not have wasted so much time doubting myself." "I doubt you ever wasted a single day. You give me too much credit." "Impossible. I could never give you enough credit for everything you are." She smiled at him, that radiant smile that still made his heart stutter. Have I mentioned that I love you? Not in the last hour. I was starting to worry. I love you. I love you for seeing me as I am. I love you for supporting my dreams even when they make your life harder. I love you for challenging yourself to grow and change. I love you for standing beside me even when everyone said we were crazy. She took his hands in hers. And I love you for making me believe that I deserve this kind of partnership, this kind of love. Garrett pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. You deserve everything good in this world. I am just lucky enough to be the one who gets to give it to you. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the sun set over their land. Their land together, equally shared and equally valued. It was everything Garrett had never known he wanted, everything he had been missing without realizing it. The second year of their marriage brought new challenges and new joys. Logan announced that he was planning to head west to California, looking for new opportunities and adventures. Jesse, somewhat surprisingly, asked to take over the majority of the day-to-day operations at the Cole portion of the ranch, claiming he was ready for more responsibility. Are you sure? Garrett asked his youngest brother. That is a lot to manage. I am sure. You and Cassandra have been doing most of the work anyway, splitting your time between here and her place. It makes sense for me to step up. Jesse hesitated, then added, and I have learned a lot from watching how you two work together. I want to try applying some of those lessons here. It was as close to an apology and an acknowledgement as Jesse was likely to give, and Garrett accepted it gratefully. Cassandra, when he told her about the conversation, beamed with pride. He is growing up, she said. Learning to see beyond the way things have always been done. We are all learning that. With Jesse managing the Cole Ranch and Ben taking on more responsibility at what everyone still called the Monroe place, Garrett and Cassandra found themselves with slightly more time to focus on their own relationship and future. They talked about children, about expanding the ranch further, about what legacy they wanted to leave. I want our children to grow up seeing that there are many ways to be strong, Cassandra said one evening. They were in the study she had created, surrounded by books and ranch records. I want our daughters to know they can be anything they want to be, and I want our sons to know that respecting women, seeing them as equals, makes them better men, not weaker ones. We will teach them that, Garrett promised. By example, if nothing else. Cassandra became pregnant that summer. She was 27, healthy and strong, but both of them worried. Childbirth was dangerous on the frontier, and too many women did not survive it. Garrett found himself gripped by a fear he had never experienced before, a terror of losing the person who had become the center of his world. I am going to be fine, Cassandra assured him when she caught him hovering for the third time in one morning. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am healthy, we have a good doctor in town, and I have no intention of dying and leaving you to explain to our child why their mother was not around. That is not funny. It is a little funny. She took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. I am scared too. But we cannot let fear paralyze us. We just have to trust that everything will be all right. She worked almost up until the day she went into labor, ignoring the scandalized comments from the church ladies who thought pregnant women should be confined to their beds. Garrett stopped arguing with her after the first few attempts. He knew stubbornness when he saw it, and Cassandra had enough for 10 women. Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1880, after 16 hours of labor that left Cassandra exhausted but triumphant. Garrett held the tiny, red-faced baby in his arms and felt his entire world shift on its axis. This was his child, his and Cassandra's, a living embodiment of their love and partnership. What should we name him? Cassandra asked from the bed, her voice weak but happy. Garrett looked down at the baby, at the tiny hands and the wisps of dark hair. Daniel, he said quietly. After your first husband, he gave you the ranch, gave you the chance to become who you are. I think he deserves to be honored. Tears streamed down Cassandra's face. That is the most generous thing anyone has ever done for me. Yes, Daniel Cole. It is perfect. Little Daniel was a healthy, hungry baby who quickly became the center of their lives. Cassandra recovered well from the birth, though it took several weeks before she was back to full strength. Garrett found himself utterly besotted with his son, spending hours just watching him sleep or trying to coax smiles from that tiny face. "You are a natural father," Cassandra observed one evening, watching Garrett pace the floor with a fussy Daniel. "I was not sure you would be. Some men see children as the woman's responsibility. I helped create him. I am responsible for him just as much as you are." Garrett adjusted the baby's blanket. "Besides, how could I not be involved? He is amazing. He is 3 weeks old and mostly just eats, sleeps, and fills his diapers." Exactly. Amazing. They figured out parenthood together, just as they had figured out everything else. Garrett changed diapers and walked the floor at night. Cassandra nursed the baby and managed the ranch accounts. They took turns, supported each other, and refused to fall into traditional patterns just because that was what was expected. The ranch continued to prosper. Ben and Marcus proved themselves capable of handling significant responsibilities, and Jesse had truly come into his own as a manager. With the operation running smoothly and Daniel old enough to travel, Garrett suggested something that had been on his mind for months. "We should take a trip," he said one evening. "Somewhere you have always wanted to go, San Francisco maybe, or back east to visit your old friends." Cassandra looked up from the accounts she was reviewing. "That is a lovely idea, but we cannot just leave the ranch." "Why not? We have good people managing everything. Jesse is more than capable of handling things at the Cole place, and Ben and Marcus have your ranch well in hand." When was the last time you did something just for yourself, just for enjoyment? She thought about it. Before Daniel died. Before I inherited the ranch. Before I became responsible for everything. Then it is long overdue. Garrett moved to kneel beside her chair. "We have worked hard, Cassandra. We have built something incredible. But we also deserve to live, to experience things beyond these borders. Let me take you somewhere beautiful. Let me show you that we can be partners in adventure as well as in work." A slow smile spread across her face. "San Francisco. I have always wanted to see the ocean." They left 6 weeks later with Daniel safely in the care of Jesse and a young woman from town who had experience with babies. The journey west was an adventure in itself, traveling by train and coach through mountain passes and across deserts. Cassandra pressed her face to the windows like a child, exclaiming over every new vista. San Francisco was everything they had hoped for and more. They stayed in a hotel overlooking the bay, walked the hilly streets hand in hand, and ate in restaurants serving food from a dozen different countries. Garrett bought Cassandra a beautiful green dress that matched her eyes, and she wore it to the theater, looking so stunning that he could barely focus on the performance. But the best part was the ocean. They stood on the beach at sunset, waves crashing at their feet, and Cassandra cried with the sheer beauty of it. "It is so vast," she whispered. "So much bigger than anything I imagined." Garrett held her close, breathing in the salt air and the scent of her hair. "There is a whole world out here. Places we have never seen, things we have never experienced. We could travel more if you wanted, see everything together. Maybe someday." She turned to face him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. "Right now I am happy with our life, with the ranch, with our son, with you. But it is good to remember that there are possibilities beyond what we know, that we do not have to be confined by expectations or tradition. We have never been very good at conforming to expectations. No, we have not." She kissed him, soft and lingering. "Thank you for this. For reminding me that I am more than just a rancher, more than just a mother. Thank you for seeing all of me always. That is the easiest thing in the world." They returned home renewed and refreshed, ready to dive back into the life they had built. Daniel had grown in their absence, learning to smile and grab at things, and Jesse reported that everything had gone smoothly in their absence. The years that followed fell into a rhythm of work and joy, challenge and triumph. They had a daughter 2 years after Daniel, a fiery little girl they named Sarah, who had her mother's red hair and stubborn determination. Then another son, William, who was quiet and thoughtful from birth. Each child was welcomed into a household where both parents were equally involved, where Cassandra could work the ranch while Garrett managed the home front, or vice versa, depending on what the day required. Their children grew up with a model of marriage that was rare in the West. They saw their father cook dinner and wash dishes. They saw their mother make business deals and manage accounts. They saw both parents working together, making decisions as partners, showing each other respect and love in equal measure. Do all parents work together like you and Papa? Sarah asked one day when she was 6 years old. She was helping Cassandra sort through breeding records, her small fingers carefully organizing papers. No, sweetheart, most families are different. How are they different? Cassandra considered how to explain without making their arrangement sound superior or judgmental. In many families, the father makes most of the decisions and does most of the work outside the home, while the mother takes care of the house and children. There is nothing wrong with that if both people are happy, but your father and I prefer to share everything equally. I like our way better, Sarah declared with all the certainty of childhood. I do too, Cassandra agreed, smiling. When Daniel was 10 and starting to show a real aptitude for ranch work, Garrett began teaching him not just the practical skills of herding and roping, but also the philosophy that he had learned from Cassandra. Women are not fragile creatures who need protecting, he told his son as they rode the fence line together. They are people just like men with the same capacity for strength, intelligence, and courage. Your mother proved that to me. Always remember that the measure of a man is not how well he dominates others, but how well he respects them. Daniel absorbed these lessons seriously. He adored his mother and had seen firsthand how capable she was. The idea that women were somehow inferior or weaker would have seemed absurd to him. Sarah, meanwhile, learned from both parents that she could be anything she wanted to be. She could wear dresses and braid her hair, and she could also ride like the wind and rope a calf. The two things were not mutually exclusive. Femininity and strength were not opposites. As their children grew, so did the ranch. The combined Cole-Monroe operation became one of the most successful in the territory. Other ranchers started adopting some of their practices, particularly their emphasis on fair treatment of workers and sustainable land management. Garrett and Cassandra became respected figures in the community, though some people never quite knew what to make of their unconventional marriage. "Does it bother you?" Garrett asked one evening when they were both in their early 40s. They were sitting on the porch of the house they had finally built together, a new structure that combined spaces from both their previous homes. "That some people still gossip about us, still think we are strange," Cassandra considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, I would be lying if I said I never cared what people thought. But then I look at our life, at our children, our ranch, our partnership, and I realize that their opinions do not matter. We are happy. We have built something real and lasting. That is worth more than any amount of approval from people who cannot see beyond their own narrow ideas." "I could not have said it better myself. You challenged every rule I thought I lived by," she said, surprising him. He had always thought of her as the one doing the challenging. "I thought I had to do everything alone, had to prove myself constantly, could never rely on anyone. You showed me that accepting help is not weakness, that partnership does not diminish me, that love can make you stronger instead of weaker. You gave me permission to be vulnerable, to admit when I was scared or uncertain." Garrett took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "And you challenged every rule I thought I lived by. You taught me that strength comes in many forms, that tradition is not the same as truth, that the world is bigger and more complex than I ever imagined. You made me a better man, Cassandra. I thank you for that every single day. Every single day, every single day. Even when you are being stubborn and difficult and driving me absolutely crazy, especially then, actually," she laughed, that bright, free sound he never got tired of hearing. "We are good for each other, are we not? The best." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their land. Over the years, this moment had become a ritual. No matter how busy the day, they always tried to find time to sit together like this, to reconnect and remember what was truly important. Their son Daniel, now a young man of 18, came riding up from the south pasture, dismounting with easy grace. He had grown tall and strong with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination. Sarah, at 16, was helping with the evening feeding, her red hair gleaming in the sunset light. William, 13 and quiet, was probably in the house with his nose in a book as usual. "Everything looks good," Daniel reported, joining them on the porch. "No breaks in the fence and the new calves are thriving." "Thank you," Cassandra said. "You have been doing excellent work this year." Daniel flushed with pride at his mother's approval. "I learned from the best, both of you." After he headed inside to wash up for dinner, Garrett squeezed Cassandra's hand. "We did all right, didn't we? With the children, with the ranch, with everything?" "We did more than all right. We built something extraordinary." Jesse visited a few weeks later, bringing news that he was planning to marry a young woman from town. Garrett had not seen his brother this happy in years, and when Jesse introduced his fiancée, Garrett understood why. Mary was intelligent, opinionated, and clearly capable of holding her own in any discussion. She reminded him quite a bit of Cassandra, actually. "I think I finally understand," Jesse admitted over dinner that night. The whole family was gathered around the table, laughing and talking over each other in the way of close families. "What you and Cassandra have. Why it works. I spent so long thinking that a man had to be in charge, had to make all the decisions, or he was not really a man. But watching you two all these years, seeing how happy you are, how successful the ranch is, I realized I was wrong. Mary makes me want to be better, and the only way I can do that is by seeing her as an equal partner." "Took you long enough," Logan, who had returned from California for the wedding, said with a grin. He had aged well, with silver threading through his dark hair and laugh lines around his eyes. "Some of us figured that out years ago. Better late than never," Garrett said diplomatically. He caught Cassandra's eye across the table and saw her smiling. They had waited years for Jesse to come around, had weathered his disapproval and criticism. To finally have his understanding and acceptance felt like closing a circle that had been open too long. The wedding was beautiful, held at the Cole Ranch with half the territory in attendance. Mary wore a dress with a practical hemline and made her own additions to the vows, just as Cassandra had. Jesse did not bat an eye, just smiled and agreed to every word. Watching his youngest brother pledge his life to an equal partnership, Garrett felt a swell of pride and hope. Change was possible. People could grow and learn. The world was slowly, incrementally becoming more open to different ways of living and loving. As their children entered adulthood, they each chose their own paths. Daniel decided to stay on the ranch, working alongside his parents and learning every aspect of the operation. He fell in love with a neighboring rancher's daughter, a capable young woman who shared his passion for the land. Their courtship looked much like Garrett and Cassandra's, had built on mutual respect and shared work, with none of the traditional gender roles that previous generations had taken for granted. Sarah, to no one's surprise, decided she wanted to study law. It was an audacious choice for a woman in 1890, but Cassandra and Garrett supported her completely. They helped her find a school that would accept female students, helped her navigate the challenges and discrimination she would inevitably face. "You can do anything you set your mind to," Cassandra told her daughter the night before she left for school. "But it will not be easy. People will doubt you, underestimate you, try to push you out. You have to be twice as good as the men around you just to be seen as half as competent." "I know," Sarah said, her chin set stubbornly. "But you taught me how to handle that. You showed me that the opinions of small-minded people do not define my worth." "I am so proud of you," Cassandra whispered, pulling her daughter into a fierce hug. "So incredibly proud." William, their quiet son, surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to be a teacher. He had no interest in ranch work, no desire to follow in his parents' footsteps in that regard. But he had a gift for explaining complex ideas in simple terms, a patience with children that was remarkable, and a genuine passion for education. "Are you disappointed?" William asked Garrett nervously when he revealed his plans. "I know you probably hoped I would stay on the ranch." "Disappointed?" Garrett shook his head emphatically. "William, I am proud that you know what you want and have the courage to pursue it. Your mother and I built this ranch so that our children would have choices, would have freedom to become whoever they were meant to be. You are doing exactly that." The relief on William's face was palpable. "Thank you for understanding, and for showing me that real strength means being true to yourself, not conforming to what others expect." As the years passed, and Garrett and Cassandra moved into their 50s, they gradually transitioned more of the ranch operations to Daniel and his wife. They remained involved, offering advice and handling some of the administrative work, but the day-to-day management fell to the younger generation. This freed them to finally take more of those trips they had talked about. They traveled to New York, where Sarah was making a name for herself as one of the first female lawyers in the state. They visited William at the school where he taught, watching him work with children with patience and skill. They took a long journey through the Southwest, seeing landscapes they had only read about. But they always came back to the ranch, to the land that had brought them together and the home they had built. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought together people from all over the territory, ranchers they had worked with, families they had helped, women Cassandra had mentored. The new century was fast approaching, bringing with it changes and challenges they could only imagine. But standing in their home, surrounded by the people they loved and the life they had created, Garrett felt nothing but gratitude. 30 years, Cassandra said that night, after all the guests had gone and they were alone in their room. "It does not feel like it has been that long. It feels like both yesterday and forever," Garrett replied, pulling her close. Her hair was more silver than auburn now, and there were lines around her eyes, but to him, she was as beautiful as the day he had met her in that Denver saloon. "I fall more in love with you every day." "That is impossible. You already loved me completely." "Then I love you more than completely." "I love you impossibly, illogically, beyond all reason or measure." She laughed and kissed him. "I love you too. I love you for never trying to change me, for standing beside me through everything, for being brave enough to question yourself and grow. I love you for giving me partnership instead of possession, respect instead of control, equality instead of subservience." "You gave me all of that too," Garrett said seriously. "You gave me permission to be uncertain, to ask for help, to admit when I was wrong. You showed me that real strength is not about dominating others but about lifting them up. You changed my entire understanding of what it means to be a man, a husband, a father. We changed each other. Yes, we did, for the better." They stood at the window, looking out over the ranch that was their legacy. Not just the land and buildings and cattle, but the principles they had established, the example they had set, the lives they had touched. Their children were carrying those values forward into a new century, teaching the next generation that love and respect were not weakened by equality but strengthened by it. "Do you ever regret it?" Cassandra asked quietly. "Choosing me, challenging everything you were raised to believe, going against convention." Garrett turned her to face him, cupping her face in his hands. "Never, not for one single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Cassandra. You challenged every rule I thought I lived by, and I have thanked you for it every day since. Every day, every single day, even the hard days, even the days we fought, even the days I wanted to throttle you for being so stubborn. Especially those days, because they reminded me that you would never back down, never surrender who you were, never let anyone, including me, diminish you. That strength, that fire, that absolute refusal to be anything less than yourself, it is what I love most about you." Tears shone in her eyes. "You make it sound heroic. I was just trying to survive, to build a life on my own terms." "That is heroic. That is the definition of heroic, actually, and you did not just survive, you thrived. You built an empire, raised incredible children, changed the way people think about women and marriage and partnership. You changed me, Cassandra, in ways I am still discovering. We changed each other, she corrected again. That is what partnership means. Yes, we changed each other. And I would not have it any other way. They kissed then, slow and deep, with the practiced ease of 30 years together and the passion that had never dimmed. Outside, the Colorado night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Garrett and Cassandra were warm. The years continued to pass, bringing the turn of the century and all the changes that came with it. The frontier was closing, civilization spreading, the Wild West becoming history. But the ranch endured, passed down through generations who remembered the story of their grandparents. The cowboy who questioned everything he believed, and the woman who taught him how. Their grandchildren listened to tales of the wild times, of blizzards and roundups, and building something from nothing. But the stories they loved best were the ones about how their grandfather had supported their grandmother when no one else would, how she had challenged him to be better than he thought he could be, how they had built a partnership based on love and respect and equality. "Tell us again how you met," the grandchildren would beg, piling onto the porch where Garrett and Cassandra still sat in the evenings, now well into their 60s. "A man tried to shoot at your grandmother in a saloon," Garrett would begin, his eyes twinkling. "And instead of screaming or fainting like the other women, she threw a whiskey bottle at his head. And then grandfather dragged the man outside and thought he had saved me," Cassandra would continue. "When really, I had everything under control. You did not have everything under control. There was a bullet hole in the wall right where your head had been, but I was handling it. You were about to get yourself killed. I was defending myself, with a whiskey bottle. It worked, did it not?" The grandchildren would giggle at this familiar argument, at the way their grandparents' eyes sparkled as they pretended to fight. They could see the love beneath the bickering, the deep affection and respect that had only grown stronger with time. Daniel and his wife had given them 4 grandchildren. Sarah, now a prominent lawyer fighting for women's suffrage, had married late but happily and had 2 children of her own. William had 3 children who were already showing signs of his gentle teaching nature. The ranch had expanded to include the next generation, a sprawling family enterprise that employed dozens of people and supported the local community. On Garrett's 65th birthday, the entire extended family gathered for a celebration. 60 people filled the house and spilled out onto the grounds, children and grandchildren, nieces and nephews, old friends and business partners. Jesse and Mary were there, still happily married after 25 years. Logan had returned from California permanently, settling on a small property nearby with a woman he had met in San Francisco. As Garrett stood looking out at all these people, all these lives that had been touched by the choice he had made decades ago to open his heart and mind to a stubborn, brilliant woman, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Cassandra found him alone for a moment, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything, nothing, how lucky I am." "We are both lucky." "No, I am luckier, because I was the one who had to change. I was the one who was living a narrow, limited life, thinking I had everything figured out. You opened up the world for me, Cassandra. You made my life bigger, richer, more meaningful. I will never stop being grateful for that." "You opened up the world for me too," she said softly. "Before you, I thought love and independence were incompatible. I thought I had to choose between being myself and being loved. You showed me I could have both. You gave me partnership without possession, support without control. You loved me not despite my strength but because of it. How could I not? Your strength is what drew me to you in the first place. Then we are even." Both changed, both grateful, both lucky beyond measure. They stood together watching their family, the legacy of their love made manifest in laughter and joy and the simple miracle of gathered loved ones. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It was a sight they had witnessed together thousands of times, yet it never grew old. As darkness fell and lanterns were lit, as music started and people began to dance, Garrett pulled Cassandra into his arms. They swayed together to the fiddle music, holding each other close, and he whispered in her ear the words he had spoken countless times over the decades. "I love you. I thank you. Every single day." "I know," she whispered back. "I feel the same way every single day." They danced under the stars, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life that defied convention, who had proved that love was strongest when built on a foundation of mutual respect and equality. They had challenged each other, changed each other, and created something that would outlast them both, a legacy of partnership, courage, and enduring love. As the night wore on, and their grandchildren fell asleep in various corners, as the younger generation took over the dancing, Garrett and Cassandra finally retreated to their bedroom. They prepared for sleep with the comfortable routine of long marriage, each knowing without speaking where the other would be and what they needed. "Do you remember the first night after we were married?" Cassandra asked as they lay in bed together. "How terrified I was that you would wake up and regret marrying someone so difficult." "You were not difficult. You were extraordinary." "I was definitely difficult." "That too," Garrett admitted with a chuckle, "but extraordinarily so." She nestled closer to him, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. This was how they fell asleep every night, had fallen asleep for 35 years. It was comfort and home and safety all wrapped into one. "I never regretted it," Garrett said into the darkness. "Not once, not ever. Every challenge, every argument, every moment of uncertainty, it was all worth it. You were worth it. You are worth it." "So are you." Her voice was getting drowsy. "So are you." They fell asleep like that, holding each other. Two people who had spent a lifetime learning how to love as equals, as partners, as the best versions of themselves. Outside, the Colorado night wrapped around their ranch, the land they had built their dreams upon. And inside, in the quiet darkness, two hearts beat in synchronized rhythm, a testament to everything they had created together. The years that followed were gentle. Garrett and Cassandra both lived to see the full realization of women's suffrage, watched Sarah cast her first legal vote with tears streaming down her face. They saw Daniel's children begin to take over the ranch operations, continuing the traditions of fair dealing and equal partnership. They watched William become a respected educator, influencing hundreds of young minds. They grew old together with grace and humor, never losing the spark that had drawn them together in that Denver saloon so many decades before. Even as their bodies slowed and their hair turned fully white, their minds remained sharp and their love remained strong. Garrett died first, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 74. Cassandra held his hand as he slipped away, whispering words of love and gratitude. She mourned him deeply, but she also celebrated the incredible life they had lived together, the changes they had wrought, the love they had shared. She lived another 3 years, spending her days with her children and grandchildren, writing down the story of her life for future generations. She wanted them to know that the world they lived in, with its greater equality and expanding opportunities for women, had been hard-won. She wanted them to understand that change was possible but required courage and persistence and the willingness to challenge everything you thought you knew. On her last day, surrounded by her family, Cassandra looked at each of her children and grandchildren with clear eyes and a peaceful heart. "Love each other," she told them. "Respect each other. Never let tradition or convention tell you who you should be. And most importantly, find someone who sees you clearly and loves you anyway. No, loves you especially because of who you are. That is the greatest gift you can give or receive." Sarah held her mother's hand as she passed, and she swore she saw her mother smile just at the end, as if she was seeing someone she had missed terribly. They buried Cassandra beside Garrett on a hill overlooking their ranch, with the mountains rising in the distance and the valley stretching out below. At the funeral, people came from all over the territory to pay their respects: ranchers and lawyers, teachers and business people, men and women whose lives had been touched by the Cole's example. Daniel spoke at the graveside, his voice steady despite his grief. "My parents taught me that love is not about control or submission, but about partnership and respect. They showed me that real strength is not dominating others, but lifting them up. They proved that tradition can be questioned, rules can be challenged, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply treating your partner as an equal. They changed not just our family, but our entire community. Their legacy is not just this ranch or even their children and grandchildren. Their legacy is the idea that love and respect are not weakened by equality but strengthened by it, and that legacy will endure long after we are all gone." He was right. The Cole Ranch continued to prosper for generations, always maintained as a partnership between equals. The story of Garrett and Cassandra became legend in the territory, an example of how two people who were willing to challenge their own beliefs and grow together could create something extraordinary. Years later, historians studying the role of women in the early West would come across the Cole Ranch records and be amazed at what they found. Here was clear documentation of a woman as equal partner in a major ranching operation, her name on contracts and deeds, her handwriting in business correspondence. Here was evidence that women had not just managed households but had been business leaders, landowners, and decision-makers. Here was proof that alternative ways of organizing families and marriages had existed, had thrived, even in places as traditional as the frontier. But the real legacy was not in the historical records or the property that survived. It was in the countless lives touched by their example, the women who found courage to stand up for themselves because Cassandra had shown them how, the men who learned to see their partners as equals because Garrett had demonstrated the rewards of doing so, the children who grew up understanding that respect and love were not gendered concepts, but universal ones. On the hill where they were buried, wild roses grew. Every spring they bloomed in profusion, red and white and pink, covering the graves with beauty and life. Local folks said it was fitting roses were tough enough to survive the harsh Colorado winters, beautiful enough to take your breath away, and complex enough to demand respect. Just like the woman who rested there, just like the love that had bloomed between two people brave enough to challenge every rule they thought they lived by. And in the evenings, when the sun set over the mountains and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, if you listened carefully, some swore you could hear the echo of laughter on the wind. Two voices, male and female, teasing and loving and thanking each other, every single day for the extraordinary gift of a life lived as equals, as partners, as the truest version of themselves. The Wild West changed, the frontier closed, the modern world emerged. But the lesson of Garrett and Cassandra Cole endured. That love is strongest when both people are free to be fully themselves, that partnership means equality, and that challenging your beliefs is not weakness but the greatest strength of all. Every single day, in countless small ways, their legacy lived on, in marriages built on respect, in women pursuing their dreams, in men who saw strength and capability in their partners rather than threats to their masculinity. Every single day, their story reminded people that change was possible, that growth was valuable, that love could transform not just two people but the world around them. And every single day, though they were long gone, Garrett thanked Cassandra for challenging him, and Cassandra thanked Garrett for standing beside her. Not in words, but in the enduring impact of the life they had built together, the love they had shared, and the example they had set for all who came after. The Wild West they had known was gone, transformed into something new and different. But the spirit of adventure, challenge, growth, and partnership that had defined their relationship lived on, passed down through generations as a testament to what two people could achieve when they dared to break the rules, question their assumptions, and build a love based on equality, respect, and the courage to grow. That was their true legacy. Not land or wealth or even the successful ranch that bore their name. Their legacy was the simple, revolutionary idea that love worked best when both people were free to be themselves. Free to grow, free to challenge and be challenged. Free to build a partnership that defied convention and created something entirely new. And that legacy, unlike the Wild West itself, would never truly end. It would continue on, carried forward by everyone who heard their story and thought, maybe I can do that too. Maybe I can challenge the rules I thought I had to live by. Maybe I can find or be someone who sees me as an equal. Maybe I can build a love that changes me for the better. Every single day, that legacy lived on. Every single day, Garrett and Cassandra's love story continued to inspire. Every single day, somewhere, someone found the courage to challenge their own assumptions and build a partnership of true equals. Every single day, their love endured. And that, in the end, was the greatest happily ever after of all.